Hey, welcome, moms. It's good to have you. It's good to have you all back and have a couple new people here too. I love that. I love that we're making new friends. I love that we're connecting with our old friends. So that's always a good thing. So today we know that we're at least going to be talking about storytelling a little bit. And if any of you have come prepared to share a story, then great. Just let me know as we go along and we'll give you time to do that because I think that'd be really fun. I was reading more about that in this storytelling book, which you can get that online, right? You can access that online for free to learn about the importance of storytelling. Why do we do it, and how do we do it? What are some tips, ways that make it more appealing, ways to really have an impact on those that we're sharing the stories with. So all the good things. And there are also even a few stories at the end that you could memorize and use to tell your children. So I'm curious to know if you do ever tell and I won't make you tell them if you answer this question, but if you do tell stories to your children, are there a couple of stories or one story that you'll tell over and over again because it's familiar, it's easy, it comes up for you, in moments when your kids want a story, or even if that's in a day gone by? Emily? Oh, sorry, Emily. I thought you were unmuted to talk. I'm so sorry. Let me just point out there that Emily was unmuted. I didn't mean it like that, Emily. So I don't know about you, but for me, one of the things that I used a lot was I used Goldilocks and the Three Bears. That kind of was, as I've thought about it, that was kind of my story, I guess. I guess I felt like I was comfortable enough with it that I could tell it and not feel too silly. And I think that's an interesting thing. How do we as moms, how are we ever at a point where we feel silly telling a story to our children? They're our babies. They love to hear us. They love to hear our voices. They love to connect with us in that way. But there are times when we maybe feel a little inadequate in that. I don't know if you've found that. Yes, Carrie.
So I was thinking about this the other day because the only story that I felt comfortable telling my kids when I was little was a story my brother used to tell me when I was little about colors and how a girl had a favorite color and she prayed that the whole world would be that color. And so the next time
And
she woke up,
Carrie, let me interrupt you just for one sec. Can you get closer to your mic?
oh yeah, is this better?
Perfect. Yep. Yep. Okay, go on.
Okay, great. So the
Thanks.
only story I felt, of course, the only story I felt comfortable telling was one my brother told me when I was little about a little girl who loved to color, and so she prayed that the whole world would be that color. And she woke up, and it was this great gratitude story, But it was the only one I felt comfortable with, and I really wanted to start telling my kids stories about the Savior. And the reason I felt silly is because I just didn't feel like, even though I had read the scriptures, multiple times, I didn't feel like I had a good way of telling those stories. Um, but then I read Geraldine Lunt's Fishers of Men, the Crown Kingdom in the Crown series, and it was amazing because it's told in a story form. And I found that when I was full of that, when I had kind of filled myself with it told in story form, it was so easy to go to my kids and say, hey, this is what happened. And it became these really beautiful experiences that, like Marlene had said before, flowers bloom because there's pressure from inside. I had to fill myself with that first.
I love that you brought that up, Carrie. I think that's such a beautiful picture, beautiful imagery for us to think about that flower bud, that has it's pushing, it's from coming from within, and that pressure from within opens it up. And so when we fill up our hearts, we can't help it. Just that pressure from within opens up and we're able to share that, and that kind of spills out to those around us. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that you had that story to tell. That's a good story. That one would be one that would be fun to find, or even just make up your own version, of that, to tell a story about waking up to a world that was just one color, and helping you be able to appreciate all the differences. I'm going to ask Lindsay Bunting to share for a sec about storytelling because I know that's a passion that she has.
Did you say my name?
I did.
I was like, I think I
You're
heard Lindsay
welcome.
Bunting. I love stories. And I use Goldilocks a lot too. So when you said that, I was like, that's what we do. When I just like need to tell a story and I don't have a book, because you gave me that puppet that flips around and it has Goldilocks. I have it, it's right there. Hold on.
I still have got to see that so I can make a copy of it. Once I let it go and then had grandchildren, I was like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Well,
I need to make one.
Ruby's about outgrown, and then you can have it back. We'll just keep passing it back and forth. But it has the little Goldilocks, and then you flip it around, and her dress goes down, and it's now Mama Bear's dress, and she's got Baby Bear and Papa Bear. And so it's just easy to like flip it back and forth and tell the story. And so my kids would just bring me this and be like, tell me a story. So Goldilocks was the one I would tell by heart. But a lot of our picture books we've memorized too. So then you could just tell the story. Like I've read Caps for Sale so many times, and it's so repetitive that I could just say it over and over again. And I actually read it to the high schoolers I teach this week, and they just sat there silent listening to it. It was so much fun, and they loved it. Do you like the Goldilocks story with this? Yeah. I don't know, there's something just magical about stories, and I have found it time and time again. So I just am very passionate that stories are important.
So important. And I want you to share the lesson that you were realizing that you found in the story Caps for Sale.
Oh, the leadership law in it? Yeah, so I was assigned to teach about the law of the picture, and that's just that we do what we see. And as like a parent or a leader, you model that behavior for your children, which is what we learn here at Well Educated Heart, that you do what you want your children to do. And so I instantly thought of Caps for Sale because we've read it so many times. And that's the whole thing, is he's so mad at these monkeys who have taken his caps, and he shakes his finger at them and they shake their finger back at him. And then he, waves his fist in the air and they wave their fist in the air, and he stamps his feet and they stamp their feet. They're just copying him, and he gets so mad, but they're just not listening to him, to what he's saying. He throws his hat on the ground and walks away. And then he realizes they've all taken their caps off, thrown them on the ground, and he has his caps back. I just think that's such a good lesson for us as mothers. We're always like, go do this, go do that. Just do that. Just read this book, go do it. It's just not as effective as when we just do it ourselves. And a lot of times we stumble upon it by accident. I think just like that peddler. Yeah, after the call. I think by accident, I'll just be doing something and pretty soon my kids are doing it. And I think, oh, that's all it took. And I was like trying to get them to do it for so long, just like the peddler and the monkeys. So
right. All the working, all the coursing, all of that, that makes you kind of crazy. And really, all you needed to do was do it yourself. And I don't know how many of you listened to the most recent podcast from Marlene Peterson, number 202. Do your due diligence. But in that, she says there are times, Carrie's listened, I could tell, there are times when it might take, she said the word years. So don't forget that. It might take years before they start following your example. And that's okay. And that's just a really hard concept for us to accept sometimes when we've just seen the other different models, so they're so prevalent in our lives. And or you've got a lot of naysayers in your life, so it's kind of hard. But really, truly, they do watch what we're doing. How many of you have some example that you could share about? I mean, we're going to talk here for a little bit about our children and about the effects of our actions on our children, our examples on our children. Then we'll talk more about our own hearts. But how many of you have an example you could share of something that you were doing, and then all of a sudden your kids were doing it? They really did follow your example and they started doing it. They wanted to do it because you were doing, or they were inspired because of your actions. Carrie.
Okay, this is not a positive thing.
Sometimes they aren't.
What I tell my parents all the time in my music classes, because a lot of the things that I learn in Well Educated Heart, they resonate so much with the approach I use, is that our kids are always watching us. And the reason they love phones so much is because they see us on our phones so much. So that one doesn't take years, but it's an example of how they really are watching and they really do love what we love.
That is good. That's so important. I've been promoting that Wait Until 8 site and others that are just kind of helping parents see the danger of phones and maybe giving them a little bit of information to learn. And that's going to take a lot of self-control on the part of us adults, isn't it? Because that's a hard one.
It is. And they are great tools. They're just great tools for when kids are older and have more self-regulation.
Right. Right. When they've learned how to do that. You're absolutely right. Okay. Other examples? You doing something and then you notice, what do you know? I've got another child wanting to do this thing. And you guys all have different examples, and I would love to hear any of them that you have. And you might even have to be really searching because you might not have yet realized, oh, wait a second, they are doing this thing. I guess they were watching me. I guess that is making a difference, Lindsay.
I feel like everybody's experienced you're cooking in the kitchen and your little kids come in and they want to cook too. And it's frustrating, but they just want to do what we're doing. And they always want to come in and cook.
Yeah, right. And depending on your mindset, if you can get yourself into a happy place where you can say, great, come on in here. We'd love to do that.
Yeah, or get creative. Get creative in the assignments you give them. Like stir at the appropriate time when it's not gonna, make a mess. Or I feel like I've gotten creative over the years of like which assignments they can do and still feel like they're helping.
Right. I've even added things to the menu that I wasn't going to have on the menu because it was like, oh, here's a safe thing. Here's something I can give them because right now with this meal, I don't know what I would have them help with, and that works. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Seven.
Did you finish? I don't want you to forget your thought. But speaking of food, I just noticed something so funny. I came from a part of China where we eat spicy food, like very spicy, but I never really cooked spicy for my kids. But I've noticed that even with my second oldest, who's like, I don't like spicy, like he's more afraid of it. But the more they see me eating it, they're just like, they wanted to taste it. So now like everybody's embracing it. Yeah.
And you see it in little things, and why wouldn't it be possible in the big things too? It really is. You just have to have the eyes to start seeing it. Lindsay, when you first started with notebooking, I remembered that experience very well too. Can you share a little bit of that? I know you're talking to your kids. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm still in your mom for a second.
They're fine. I told her we'd play this game after the call, and she set it up on the arm of the chair, like,
oh yeah,
right here.
It's all ready to go.
Yeah. Okay, just a minute. I just sat down to do notebooking, and I thought I'll just do it with my oldest daughter. She was like 12 at the time. I thought she would enjoy that. We'll just do that together. And I never anticipated the little kids even having any desire to do that. And the first time we sat down to do it, they all brought in their papers and they're like, well, we want to do it. Of course, I had cookies involved for those that like came to the table. That always helps. They all came in, they all wanted to cut out their pictures. They were asking questions about the pictures. They were gluing them in their books. They wanted to know how to spell the name at the top and like what we were doing. What do those numbers mean? And it's just so fun to just be like, you don't expect those things. You're just doing it for you and maybe one other kid. And then it was fun to see them all follow. And they all have their little notebooks. And then they would get excited to share it with grandma and tell them what they knew about Christopher Columbus or whoever we just did. And it's fun.
Yeah, I love that. And it's not perfect all the time,
No.
but that principle is true that they do follow. They do follow us.
And it doesn't have to be that consistent. You may do it 5 times and then not do it for 4 months. And they still remember those times you did it. And then you can come back to it. We haven't
Oh,
done it in a while, and they're
you
always
get
asking me, how come we don't do that anymore?
right. You get so much mileage out of one activity,
Yeah.
one fun creative thing that you do with your kids. You know, it can last for weeks and weeks. Amy, I don't know, are you in a place where you can talk? If you are, I know I'll see you or hear you. And if you're not, I understand. Yes.
I am. I'm not thinking of anything really right now. That's the thing. I'm like, there's things I wish they did, but I don't.
I can think of things that I see in your kids, in the example that you have put before them of music and a love of music. So how about that?
Okay. Yeah, that was like the only thing I could
That's a
think of.
huge thing. And for many moms who don't even know how to approach that yet, you know, that can be very inspiring.
Okay, we'll go with that. Anyway, no, I mean, there's other things too. Just kind of taking responsibility for your stuff and I don't know, and kind of working hard as at least as far as education
Oh yeah.
and the music thing. Yeah, they like to practice, which is a good thing. Anyway, yeah, it's weird because we had to tell them to stop practicing at this point, and which is good, mainly because it's too loud. But
Can you guys just stop playing your instruments? Can you please?
kind of, yeah. Well, especially because Rick, he has to leave for work at 4:30 every morning, so it has to be quiet after 8. And so that's sometimes like you have to plan around that. But I don't know.
And I know music is such a part of your life that you probably don't even really see that as a thing, but for so many people, that's very inspiring.
Okay.
You're so cute. Okay, fine. Oh, I love it. And I love it. And I also love that you have a craft room, a room that you go to create. And I think that that is another beautiful thing that you share as an example to your children, that creation is important and that it is something that is fulfilling to their mother.
Okay. And you know what's funny about the craft room is that they use it too. And so sometimes I'll go in, I'm like, oh, what was created here recently?
Yeah.
So
That's a nice
but
way to say that.
it is nice that the stuff is all there. We know where it is because usually you don't have a ton of time. So if you know where all the things are, it goes a lot faster.
Yeah. I think that's a good way that you're an example. And I love that. Ida, I know you had your hand up too. Thanks, Amy. I appreciate you. Ida, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I did. I was thinking when Amy was talking, she's like, well, I guess. So cute, Amy. I think it's just sometimes it's so much a part of who we are, we don't even think about it. You know what I mean? Like with Amy's music, like it's just so much a part of who she is. Her kids just pick it up and she doesn't really like, I don't know, she probably doesn't even think about it. But another example that I had was my sister, my older sister, her like for a few years or for a year or something, for a while, they were like, they didn't have a ton of money. And so they canceled their cable and they didn't have any TV. And I was like, great. But no. But anyways, but during that time, it was so cool because she started reading a ton herself. And she was like, she's a really fast reader and she loved just, you know, reading all kinds of books. And so her boys, who were like probably middle school age, and she has 6 boys, they all started reading a ton too. And just kind of like, oh, well, what are you reading, Mom? Like, and they started picking up books and they're all read a ton as well. And I think that that was such a, for me at the time, my kids were still little, that was a powerful example to me of these, like you doing something and then your kids are like, well, that looks interesting. There's no TV to watch, so maybe I should read some books, you know? And I've noticed my kids, when they see me doing that kind of stuff, they've done that more, especially the older ones. But and then also like even music, like I am not super musical at all, but I love music and we have a piano and I've tried to like, the more I've tried to bring that into like our everyday, like just I practice on the piano or like having the guy come and tune our piano or talking about music and sharing music. And I've noticed my kids are more interested in it too, in just little ways here and there, and like offering them, oh, here's a piano lesson. Do you want to take a piano lesson? Like just the free Hoffman Academy piano lessons. But they're starting to want to do that more. And I feel like that has been a big thing just because I put more emphasis on it myself, it's helped them. So it's been cool to kind of see that happening a little bit.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so true. And here's the thing. If that can happen for them, then can't it happen for you, right? I mean, you saw that happening. Music wasn't a thing that you were super familiar with. And so you stretched a little bit, you explored a little bit, and then you begin to love a little bit, right? I mean, so if you're looking at an area and you're thinking, oh, I don't really know about that, or oh, I don't really do that well, or something, explore it. Look into it a little bit, spend a little time with it. That's what I'm doing with poetry. And I'm realizing that I like it a lot more than I realized. And I used it occasionally, and I think it's this foreign thing, but I'm learning to really appreciate and love it. But that's an area that for me, I don't feel as experienced with. As with the other areas, I think, yeah, I can see that. I know how valuable those things are. I used those things. Right. But the poetry was an area not as familiar with. And I've had these really cool, as soon as I decided that I wanted to start exploring that and learn to love it, just opportunities started appearing in my life to be exposed to it more. And that's been really cool too, just to see how that happens. I think that Heavenly Father will do that for us. You want a new opportunity? You want to experience this more? If you express that to him, or you have that desire in your heart, I think, I know he helps you out with that and brings those opportunities to you. And I think that's a very sweet thing as well. Okay, did anybody have a story? Did anyone bring a story that they wanted to share?
I can share something before we jump off onto that.
Yes. Okay, hold on. Who is that? It is really quiet. Oh, Melanie. Where's your mic, sweetie? I just want to hear you well.
Hear me at all?
I can, but it's kind of echoey. Can you guys hear her though? Maybe you guys can hear her.
I don't know how to change that.
That's okay. Just keep your voice volume up and it'll be great.
So from another angle, I've noticed that when I do read books, I often read on my Kindle app on my phone. And so the kids just see me on my phone. So where it could be a good example of them seeing, oh, mom's reading too, they don't even know what I'm doing. So that's something I've tried to be aware of too. And sometimes if I am still reading on my phone, if they come up and say, oh, what are you doing? I tell them I'm reading a book, And another thing is when I do journal, I've usually been very private about it, just writing in my bedroom and just kind of keeping it to myself. And so the idea of notebooking and sharing and doing that with kids is like blowing my mind a little, the last few months as I've been learning about this and just considering making it more open, like it doesn't have to be private, all these thoughts that I put on the paper about, different things that are touching my heart. I can share that, and it doesn't have to be so, not everything has to be so private, and I can do that with them.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that that's important. I think that's important to think about think about the things that you want to teach your children and then kind of explore, look and see, am I modeling that? Because I think you have to be that deliberate in your desires. You have to really think about, what do I want to teach them? What do I want them to learn and experience? How do I want them to feel about this or that? And then what am I doing to encourage that? How am I helping to nurture that in them? I think I told you before that I had that thought about homemaking and family, and am I creating in my children a desire to have, the kind of an atmosphere in the home and that kind of a feeling that I want them to feel? What am I doing that might be hindering that? And what am I doing that could be helping, fostering, nurturing, encouraging that? Okay, so on the question of the story, what I had talked about last week was if somebody has either just a story that they would like to tell, like it as if it's story time. Moms like stories too. I love to have somebody tell a story. Then they can share a story, or if you have a story, you know, of your life or something that happened to you, you can share that story as well. Carrie. Let me see. Carrie, you're muted, but you have your hand up. Did you want to share? We can't
Oh,
hear you.
sorry. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
You know, I used to do this every day. You would think I would know how to do it.
It's
Um,
okay.
I just wanted to say that I actually have to go, but this has been so lovely and heartwarming. Thank you so much for letting me come today.
I'm so glad you did, Carrie. Thank you for making that happen.
You take care.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who didn't hear, Carrie runs another Mothers of Influence group. Hers is online, kind of in blog form. And so Carrie and I have talked back and forth and tried to make it work for her to be able to come here so that we could connect and have at least a little opportunity to share. And then I joined her group so that we could help each other, you know, in our group. So anyway, that was fun to get to have that connection. So, Ida, Cadence, I'm just looking at people who haven't spoke up yet. Emily, Linnell, Melissa, Amber, any of you, Laura, any of you have anything to share in story form or about a story? If you don't, it's fine, but I'm gonna just open that up real quick and see if anybody does. Or Katrina. Oh, for my friends here, you finally get the opportunity to meet Katrina, because Katrina's here too, my other sister-in-law. So you've met all of them now, I think, because you've met Kristen and Leslie and Amy and now Katrina. So I am blessed with 4 amazing sisters-in-law. So it's just such a blessing. I love them. They are an inspiration to me in my life. So we get together and we have Mothers of Influence meetings. We never knew that we were, but we do, and it's been wonderful. There she is. There's Katrina.
I loved hearing the experiences, and just wanted to share something. Last week, I ended up going to Southern Utah and staying with a cousin on the other side. And she is one of the oldest of the group of cousins, and there were many of us. And I was one of the youngest. And her daughter came, who is expecting her 5th child, and the way that her daughter spoke of our ancestors was just the most heartwarming thing, because she just got this cutest look on her face, and she said, "Oh, but they're my friends." And her mom is showing us this old picture of their her great grandfather, and they were picnicking next to their automobile from like I don't know, maybe the 50s or the 40s. And they were there working on constructing a building together. They were donating their time. They'd come in, they were working on this construction, and a photographer just snapped a picture of them. And they didn't even realize it was up in the temple open house area. And the mother walked through and said, "Oh, that's my grandpa." And she was showing me this picture, and the daughter walked in and she said, the mother was telling me, "I think this is like Lorenzo maybe, or maybe that one is." And the sister walked in and she's like, "Oh," the daughter walked in and said, "Oh no, that's Dax. You know, yeah, we're pals." And she just knew each of them. She knew their nicknames and what they liked. And it was lovely. And we just started sharing stories. And as I shared 2 stories that I had grown up hearing my whole life, and when I was little, I didn't remember the names. I didn't know how it was related to them, but I knew it was a story about my people. And I started sharing these stories, and my older cousin, whose dad passed away when she was her parents had separated, her dad had passed away. Her family life was much less stable than mine was growing up. And her comment was, "I never heard those stories. I never heard those stories growing up." And her dad was brother to my mom. And she said, "I think the moms," and we call them the Anderson aunts, and they are a powerhouse in all of our lives. And she said, "I think the moms told the stories." And they were powerful stories. And I'll just share one of them that was such an influence in my life about my, and this is how they would tell it, you know, that, "Well, your grandma was expecting a baby. She had 4 or 5 children already. She was expecting a baby when the doctors discovered that she had cancer. And so she had a choice, and they said, we can operate and save your life, but if we do, the baby will probably not make it. If we wait until you have delivered the baby to do this operation, the cancer will continue spreading and you will most likely not make it. And she chose to have her baby and really give her life in order to have her baby. And that baby's name was born, his name was Paul. And we have a beautiful picture of this dark-haired woman with kind of a fur, coat on, holding this one-year-old baby boy. And it was taken just a little bit before her death. And when she passed away, the neighbors came and offered and said, we'll take care of the baby. The oldest child at home was 16. It was a girl. Her name was Lily. And the neighbors came and said, well, we'll take care of that sweet poor baby. And the family met and had a family council. And they said, no way. Our mom died to have this baby. We are taking care of our baby. So the oldest sister quit school and took care of the children and the aging grandmother that was also in the home. That is a story that I grew up with. And as a child, you don't ever put it into words. But the feeling that I grew up with was, in our family, life is important and babies are important. And they are so important that we are willing to sacrifice whatever it takes for them, whether we give our life for them or we quit school for them. That is something that is so valuable. And so I don't remember tons of stories, but there are a few that literally have been life-changing.
I love that, Katrina. Thank you for sharing that. Katrina has lots of good family stories. Katrina is the sister-in-law who made for us the family history photos that I've told you about, where we've got the photo of grandma and grandpa and then great grandma and great grandpa, and we on the back of them has some stories. It tells about their birth and tells a little bit about them, and we treasure those. Family is important to Katrina, and it's important to her children, and you hear that and you see that when you talk to her children. I love that. Thank you, Katrina. Laura, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know, it's so nice of me to do that to my friends. But Laura, when I talk to your children, it's so much fun to hear them tell stories about their family. Why do they tell stories to other people, to strangers and to friends? But why do they tell stories about family?
You know, what's funny is last night, the boys and I finished Freckles, where he talks about he doesn't want to live. You know, he's left with that choice of, and I hope I'm not ruining this for anybody, but he's left with a choice to live or not live. And he just wants to die because he feels like he doesn't know where he comes from. And this past year, we were given the great blessing of preparing for this trip, which then motivated me to look up family history stories. And when we learned those family history stories, it gave us kind of that same experience of knowing where you came from. And what a blessing that is. And we learned so many stories that were just amazing. That, for example, my 8-year-old son, we learned that one of his grandpas was a bodyguard to Joseph Smith, and a story about one time he was the only person there. They didn't have any guns. All he had was like his walking stick, and there were 40 men coming to take Joseph's life. And Joseph came to him and said, will you guard me tonight? There's going to be an attempt on my life. And so he was there. Somebody else went for more help, and he used his walking stick to guard the gate and bar all these men who were trying to push on the other side to come in. And he just used his wit to kind of talk them down out of their, anger or whatever they were feeling. But, gentlemen, why are you here? We're here to talk about Joseph about gentleman business. And he's like, well, then you need to come during gentleman hours. And it was just so funny. But afterwards, my 8-year-old was like that's my grandpa, my grandpa. And I think when you know this, like your family stories, it does, just like Freckles, it gives you a sense of who you are, and gives you strength to get through the hard times in your life, helps you to know you can do hard things too. For a personal example of me, knowing those family stories, I learned several of them when I was going through something hard. And there was a time that I had learned a story about one of my grandmas, and I thought, if she could do that, then I can do this. And it gave me strength to get through the things that I was going through. And so it's been a huge blessing. And then to watch my kids then automatically know those stories because they've heard them and I told them. And I think you've said this before, that when I tell them, I get excited. And so when you tell a story that you're excited about, they just feel that excitement. And then they get excited about it as well.
Yep. And I love to see that in your children. I think that's so fun. Thank you for letting me call you out like that. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. Okay, anybody else? Ida, yeah.
So
you keep moving. Where are you going? What are you doing? Yeah. New background.
Crazy in my
Totally understand.
I was going to say that I love that what you shared about Freckles, Laura. And I love, for him, it was knowing that he came from goodness, right? And I think if you don't, like, sometimes you might not have family stories of goodness that you know of. You might not have them. You might not know where to find them or if there are any. But I think stories in general of people that do hard things or come from hard places and overcome. And we all share the same heritage with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all those people. And if you look at just Abraham, look at his story. He came from a super dysfunctional family, right? He was able to look back and say, hey, Adam and Eve and Enoch and all these people before, I want to be like them. So sometimes maybe you have to look a little bit farther back, but there are those good stories. And I think just stories in general of people that go through difficult things. And if we share those with our children, like I wish I could share this a little bit on the, I think I shared it on a little bit, but just sharing the ending of Cinderella, where she forgives her sisters and invites them to come live in the palace, that was huge. And it was so powerful telling it in my own words to my daughter, and her recognizing that, be like, that's not how it ends. Like, I know, but really it's about forgiveness, just like in the Bible. He forgave his brothers, he sold them into slavery, and told the story of Esther. And yesterday, she listened to the story, and she's like, "Yeah, Mom, can you tell that story about the lady who's a Jew and she saved all the people?" And I was like, "Yes, that's it." But I've read those stories or we watched videos of them, but she didn't care about the video. She wanted to tell the story, and that is so cool. I just felt this connection telling that story, and even any family stories, like listening to stories about your parents or whatever, but just talking, it's like Marlene said, it's like your heart is talking to their heart, and something about that is so powerful. And I just was like feeling that telling those stories, like even simple things like Cinderella, I was like, oh, this is different. There's a different feeling here. It's a closer, a stronger connection,
Yeah.
So I love it.
I love that too. And I think you can also tell stories about your children. Find a story about something that they did or that you did with them, and they know everything about it. They were there. It's their story, but they love to hear it.
When I tell, like, my son who has juvenile diabetes, and we talk about his story,
yeah,
and we share that, and he shares that and he likes it. And you know, it was really interesting because in our ward just like 2 months ago, there's another family and their father has type 1 diabetes, just like my husband. And their son just got diagnosed with type 1.
Oh.
Like, this is like, I don't know, 6 months after Porter. And so I was able to talk to her and comfort her and say, you know, these are some things that helped my son. And one of the things I told her was like, have him write about his story, have him talk about it and share his experiences and what he's learning and what you're all learning. And she's like, oh, that's so good. And she said, you know, they love to journal, so maybe I'll encourage him to do that. And I was like, yeah, totally. That will be super helpful for him. And it was just cool to be able to share that experience and be able to be in a place where I could, you know, like just walk, you know, just be a listening ear and like walk with them through that. That was kind of a, I don't know. I don't want to say it's like a tender mercy because obviously it wasn't a tender mercy for them to go through that, but it was like, and they were kind of comforting us through it when it happened with us, but then we were able to also, you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Anyways, so enough about that.
Oh, that's good. That is wonderful. It is good when we can share our stories and help somebody else. That's a great thing. Okay, anybody else have a story they want to share? Or any comments about the power of storytelling? Just checking everybody. Laura, yeah.
I have another story. So my father-in-law is not a good reader. He's never been a good reader, but you asked so I knew him as a youth, and like in Sunday school, if he was ever asked to read a scripture, he would just be like, he'd look at it and he'd be like, well, what it says, like he wouldn't read it if he was asked to read it. He's just not a good reader, but he has developed the art of telling stories. And when he tells a story, you feel it through him. And then so my 8-year-old son asked him to speak at his baptism, and he could still tell you exactly the story that Grandpa shared at his baptism. One, he has a really good memory too, but just the way Grandpa tells stories, you feel it and you remember that story because of the way Grandpa told the story. And so that's always been a fun blessing to our kids, is the stories that Grandpa shares. And they might be family stories, they might be world like war stories about a hero or something like that, or it could just be general stories. But when he tells a story, it's amazing what the children remember from Grandpa's stories. So.
I love that. I've heard about him and his stories actually. So that's really cool. And to learn that he wasn't a good reader. So there can be limitations in your abilities, but you can still develop that talent of being able to be a good storyteller. And there's so many things in Marlene's writing that talks about the importance of being a storyteller. And I do think, so now is the time we talk about you, about us. I know we're getting toward the end, but the importance of filling your heart with goodness. We need to make the time to do that. That is not a frivolous thing. That is a vital thing for us to do every day, to read a good story, to fill our hearts with meaningful characters and experiences. Yeah, Lindsay.
And that restoring the art of storytelling, she talks about when we read a story as if we're preparing it to read aloud to a child, we need to read it out loud to ourselves. There's power in hearing the words and then telling ourselves that story over and over again, so that it's like in our hearts. So when we do tell the story by heart, like it is a part of our heart. We have to tell the story out loud to ourselves, not just skim it over in the book. But there is something so powerful in reading it out loud. And I think over the years of doing Well-Educated Heart, I almost can't read a story in my head anymore. I have to read it out loud to myself. I'm the only one in the room or in the car. I read it out loud because there's something so powerful about hearing it told out loud, even if we're telling it to ourselves.
I love that. That's a good reminder. So for all of us, for this next week, could we do that? Could we make a little mom pact of we're going to read something beautiful, something uplifting, something encouraging, something heart stirring. It could be a sad story even, but something that stirs our hearts, right? Something that gets in there, and read it aloud. Can we do that? Would you all be willing to do that? We could try that together and see what happens and share our experiences with that. I think that's a beautiful idea and a challenge that we could take. And there are lots of stories, but you can take just a picture book, a little storybook. There are lots of sources online, the free source resources at Well Educated Heart. So many beautiful stories there. So many things that you could listen to. Read and then read out loud to yourself. And then I'll bet you'll want to share that, because that's what happens. You read the story and you find, I don't know what it is, but reading aloud, it kind of helps you be more aware of all the good things, and you want to share that. You just kind of need to share that. So I think we should do that. Shall we? Yes, I'm getting nodding heads. Okay. All right, now don't run away from me. Come back Friday so we can talk about it, what our experiences were in sharing those stories. We all have stories to share. I found that in teaching seminary yesterday and today, I was teaching seminary, and I used stories. I told stories. Okay, I love Lindsay's tip over here. I would recommend the stories at the end of Restoring the Art of Storytelling. They were written differently for reading aloud. And that's true. There are things that you kind of do differently when you're going to read the story aloud. They're shorter. They're more just like the main points. They have a quick introduction to the characters and kind of the background of the story. They paint a picture, and then they have an interesting, where they tell you about what's going on, and then they tell you kind of the moment of conflict, or whatever what else do you call that? Because I don't want it to sound like a negative. It's not just that. There's a word that means it's the important, I can't come up with words, the important part of the story there. And then the resolution. Yeah, and they're always moving forward. Thanks, Lindsay. The story moves forward so that you don't give the reader time to kind of get bored and want to be done. Climax. Thank you, Amber. I knew somebody would know the word. It's funny when we're on Marco Polo's, when somebody else is searching for a word, you guys, you don't have to pause. You don't even have to apologize, because we're going to fill it in for you. It's all good. It's just the teller that can't think of the word in the moment. Like everyone else is going, I got it. I got you. Don't worry. Keep moving forward. It's okay. It's all good. Okay. So storytelling is powerful. There's such beauty and good stories. Yeah, Laura.
Well, so I told you and Lindsay about a dream that I had this last week. Just a couple nights ago, I had this dream, and it was so vivid. My husband had finished giving a lesson. We were like in Sunday school. My husband had finished his part of the lesson, and now it was my turn. And I picked up this paper that I was supposed to be teaching, and I was had this realization that this is the first time I'm reading this, and I didn't prepare at all. And I look up, and in my dream, I saw our current Sunday school teacher, who prepares hours and he's just an amazing teacher. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I didn't prepare. And so I've been thinking the last few days about, what could this mean? What am I not preparing for? What am I not spending time and preparation of? And I thought about, okay, maybe I'm not preparing my homeschool day, and have been thinking about how I could do that better. But now I just kind of had this thought, if I'm not preparing, how important it is to prepare and pre-read those stories, because so many times I've gone to read stories to my kids and I'm reading it for the first time. But if I would have pre-read that story and knew what was coming, so you could voice get your voice excited when things should be exciting, or read it with more passion because you had prepared yourself to read it or to share it with your kids, or any preparation, so that when the time comes and you feel like, oh, I need to share this story, you're prepared to share that story. I just like thought, oh my gosh, that is like one big thing that like that's one way I should be preparing myself more is with stories. So I had an
I
off
love
moment.
that. No, I love that. That's so great. So when I was teaching seminary this morning, I said both days I had a story. I was given a story to share, a story that went beautifully with the lesson. Last night, the story that came was such a surprise to me because I didn't realize, I learned a really important thing. I was reading and learning about Sarah and her handmaid and offering her handmaid to Abraham in that story in the Old Testament. And I learned that, that custom was very common in that culture. And I was thinking about it. So I learned about that custom, and I learned about when plural marriage has happened. One of the ways that happens is, and that's a whole other thing over here. So we're not going there. This is my story. So what would happen is the first wife would take the hand of the second wife and she would put it in the hand of her husband. Okay, so that's in the culture. That's how that would happen. That's how that ceremony happened. So now let me tell you my story. So I have a very dear friend. Our families grew up together. My husband and her husband were best friends. They're cousins. They grew up together, spent all their hours together. She and I met when we both married our husbands. Our children, their children are older than our children. So when we were having babies, we were vacationing with them and we'd all get together, and the mountains are over at the beach, and we spent a lot of time together. Well, my dear sweet friend, she found out that she had cancer, and she had a really long, hard battle with cancer. And it was the ups and downs that cancer brings, the difficulties and the treatments and the surgeries, and then the joyous news that she was in remission and that they got it all and everything was going to be great. And then the sad news that, oh, it's back, but we're going to do this time, and we're going to try this. And we had this up and down for about 7 years before cancer finally took Angie's life. And so Angie was gone, and that was really hard. And it was really hard for Tom. He was very lonely. And it just so happened that a friend that we had known, and it was just kind of a very, very small connection, but we'd known her. She moved in around the corner. And I felt prompted one day to take her a Book of Mormon. So I took a Book of Mormon that I'd written in, and I took some brownies, and I took those over to her home and shared that with her. And I was quite certain that the book would go on the shelf, and that was okay. I was supposed to take it, and so I did. And then a couple years after that, this had happened a couple years before. And then a little bit after that, it happened that Tom was working on a project, and he needed an assistant in an area that Courtney was experienced in. And so Courtney they connected, and they were on this photo shoot. And anyway, they started talking, and then as they started talking, she became interested in the things that he was talking about. So Courtney pulled that Book of Mormon off the shelf and started reading. And then they started having conversations and things, and they ended up enjoying each other's company and deciding that they wanted to spend their lives together and that they would get married. And I was very happy for them, but I was kind of a little bit conflicted. It wasn't my business, it wasn't my life or anything, but I just had this little bit of a difficult bump. Just trying to kind of deal with my feelings about that. Well, I had this dream, and a little bit after having the dream, I ended up being with an aunt who was the mother of Tom and would be the mother-in-law of Courtney, and was Angie's mother-in-law, and she loved Angie, and had the same, just at least had that same kind of love for Angie, and a little bit of a hiccup right there. And we were talking, and we shared that we had these dreams, and it turned out we'd had the same dream. And in the dream, there was just this beautiful background. It was a beautiful blue sky and beautiful green hill, and the grass was just kind of, flowing a little bit, how that can happen. It was just really pretty. And all of a sudden we see Angie. And we see Angie come and take Courtney's hand. and put Courtney's hand in Tom's. At the time, I knew nothing about that being this practice, but it healed my heart a little bit. I mean, it just kind of prepared my heart. I was so happy, and I loved Courtney, and I was excited about that. But I just had that, like I said, a little bump. And that was all I needed to be able to know that Angie this was her. She was happy about this, and it was good. Anyway, but it was just so interesting last night to have that experience where I learned about it, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. That I just know that actually is a thing. Anyway, but it was just kind of a tender thought for me, and the story was so powerful. In being able to teach the principle that I was teaching this morning. And there's nothing like a story to be able to get into your heart and help you receive a message. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And now we will turn the time over to Linnell for our summary and wrap up.
Sorry for sharing that story. Something I love about storytelling and sharing of personal experiences is that we can extract or get out from the story anything that is applicable to our life. It becomes very personal. Once someone shares their own personal story, then we can take that into our hearts and learn whatever it is that we need to learn from that. And so maybe what I learned from it is different from Laura or Ida or Melissa or anyone else. And I think that's another power of stories. It's a beautiful way to connect, is to just open our hearts and share stories. And at the beginning of our talk, of our discussion, we talked a lot about being a picture. It was Lindsay who was talking about that. Being a picture or being a model, being an example for our children to follow. And it reminded me of a quote that I'm going to read. This is from a talk given by Thomas S. Monson in a general meeting of the church. And he says, "It is our duty to live our lives in such a way that we may be examples of righteousness for others to follow. As I've pondered how we might best provide such examples, I have thought of an experience I had some years ago while attending a stake conference. During the general session, I observed a young boy sitting with his family on the front row of the stake center. I was seated on the stand. As the meeting progressed, I began to notice that if I crossed one leg over the other, the young boy would do the same thing. If I reversed the motion and crossed the other leg, he would follow suit. I would put my hands in my lap and he would do the same. I rested my chin in my hand and he also did so. Whatever I did, he would imitate my actions. This continued until the time approached for me to address the congregation. I decided to put him to the test. I looked squarely at him, certain I had his attention, and then I wiggled my ears. He made a vain attempt to do the same, but I had him. He just couldn't quite get his ears to wiggle. He turned to his father, who was sitting next to him, and whispered something to him. He pointed to his ears and then to me. As his father looked in my direction, obviously to see my ears wiggle, I sat solemnly with my arms folded, not moving a muscle. The father glanced back skeptically at his son, who looked slightly defeated. He finally gave me a sheepish grin and shrugged his shoulders. I have thought about that experience over the years as I've contemplated how, particularly when we're young, we tend to imitate the example of our parents, our leaders, and our peers. The prophet Brigham Young said we should never permit ourselves to do anything that we are not willing to see our children do. We should set them an example that we wish them to imitate. And this cute, sweet story has been on my mind all week as I thought of my example, as I thought of what I'm doing, because I know my children are watching me and they are following the good, the bad, the funny, the silly, all of it. They just do what I do. And it inspires me and motivates me to reflect on my actions and my life and my habits and to make changes now. Every day is a gift and every day is an opportunity to change one thing. And when we notice in our mirror of our children that some habit is not good, then we can take a look at ourselves and maybe I can change this. And when we notice something that they're doing well that we have taught them, we can give ourselves a pat on the back and we can be proud of that opportunity or that blessing that we are in their lives, that we're helping them and teaching them to grow. And so I am so inspired by Well-Educated Heart Principles because it helps me become better and I feel like I'm changing, but it also gives me so much hope for what my children have in their future, that I can be a better example for them and I can help them just have a model to follow. And I think it's really sweet that as we're talking about storytelling in particular, maybe it's something that we have to practice or learn or incorporate a little bit more in our lives. But I think it will be a blessing to us as we tell our children stories, and then they in turn can use that gift and maybe tell us a few stories. And I think that will help with our connection with our children as well as they get older.
I love that. I love that. That was so perfect for our discussion today. Thank you so much, Linnell. We sure appreciate you. And I love it. I love it. I love it. And yes, invite your children to share stories with you too. I think that's so sweet. That idea of children being a mirror to ourselves, that really is so good. So, so, so good. And Lindsay said, I want to add that our children are never too old for us to model for them or share stories with them. It's so true. It's so, so, so true. So moms, as you go through this next week, when you have some moments that you feel really challenged, I'll just use that word, just remember that you are not alone, that you have this whole grid, this lovely quilt of friends that are thinking about you and probably praying for you. Don't forget to pray for one another because it really does help. But you're not alone as you go through this next week, and we'll have opportunity to talk again next Friday. So thank you so, so much. Have a beautiful weekend. Have a beautiful week, and we'll see you again next Friday.